Hello, my friends. This is Pastor Paul Jansen from United Reformed Church in Somerville, New Jersey. This is the weekend of October 8th, 2023, and I'm going to jump right into the scriptures because they're long and then the sermon's a little bit long, so forgive me. I'm going to jump right in with the Ten Commandments without reading the preface before it and whatnot. So it begins. They begin. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Observe the Sabbath day, to keep it holy as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your manservant or your maidservant or your ox or your ass or any of your cattle, or the sojourner who is within your gates, that your manservant and maidservant may rest as well as you. You shall remember that you were a servant in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out thence with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. Honor your father and mother, as the Lord your God commanded you, that your days may be prolonged, and that it may go well with you in the land which the Lord your God gives you. You shall not kill. Neither shall you commit adultery, neither shall you steal, neither shall you bear false witness against your neighbor, neither shall you covet your neighbor's wife, and you shall not desire your neighbor's house, his field, or his manservant, or his maidservant, his ox or his ass, or anything that is your neighbor's. Whew, long reading. Sometimes to know where you are, you need to know where you've been and where you're going. And I would say that we don't really understand the purpose of the Ten Commandments unless we look back at where our mothers and fathers were and where they're going. It won't take that long. So God had promised Abraham and Sarah that he would bless the world through their descendants. From there, the story rushed through Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Rachel, and Joseph. The story of Joseph finally got God's people into Egypt. The good news and bad news of Egypt was that they flourished so much, that's the good news, that they got the Pharaoh's attention, and that was the bad news. So he decided it was time to reduce the surplus population, and he worked them into the ground. How bad was it? One of the epithets for Egypt was the iron furnace. More on that later. Then along came Moses, who had killed an Egyptian and was sent out into the wilderness as punishment for that. And it was there that a burning bush spoke to him, and he learned that God's name was Yahweh. The people back in Egypt, meanwhile, cried out, and Yahweh heard them and promised them that he would give them a land flowing with milk and honey. More on that later, too. Fast forward through 10 plagues and Passover and the parting of the Red Sea and wandering in the wilderness of the Sinai Peninsula for some 40 years, and here they are now, in this reading, almost ready to enter into the land of Canaan, the land of milk and honey, and boom, 10 Commandments. Or, as I'm going to call them, 10 conditions. It's an old story, but it's as alive today as it ever was. Alive as it ever was because here we are, this side of the story, a long time since the stories the Bible tells, and we're still living with the memory of the iron furnace and the promise of milk and honey. So a word about that iron furnace. What images come to mind when you hear about an iron furnace? I don't know about you, but me, I think of blast furnaces like in Footloose or The Terminator or Deer Hunter. For us, the iron furnace is a hellscape of darkness, lit only by molten metal, massive cauldrons of smoke and filth and coke and slag and overwhelming heat. I can't imagine working in one of them. I suppose I could say ancient Egypt was like that, but it wasn't. They didn't have the technology to forge steel from iron ore the way we do. What they did have was crucibles made out of iron. Crucibles are often small vessels that you heat up, and when you heat them up, you put other metals inside them to melt them, and it sorts them out because different metals melt at different temperatures. So if you toss some tin and some brass and some gold into an iron crucible, the tin will start to melt at just 450 degrees Fahrenheit, and so you can tip the crucible and pour it out. But at that temperature, the gold and the brass, they won't have been touched at all. If you heat up the crucible to 1700 degrees, more than 3 times hotter, then the brass will come out, and if you take it another 250 degrees, you'll have molten gold. But the crucible will still be intact. You need to go over 800 degrees higher to melt the iron. So, you see, it's safe, but boy, is it strong. Now, the point of this metallurgical excursion is that when our mothers and fathers looked back on the way life used to be, they thought, Egypt, iron furnace, where the Egyptians turned up the heat on us, where only the strong survived, the land where our fathers died, where we got sorted out in a crucible that was stronger than any of us, a place where the powers that be were so strong that only the right hand of God could have delivered us, and it did. We were in the iron furnace, and Yahweh snatched us out and brought us here to the brink of, well, certainly no more fire, but milk and honey. Can you imagine a starker contrast between the way we remembered the way it was and the way we're expecting it's going to be? Milk and honey, milk and honey. Now don't get your mind set on 2% milk at the grocery store or that sterile amber sweet stuff in a little bear-shaped squirt bottle. That's not what he was talking about. The milk was goat's milk and the honey was sap from dates, which, well, both of which might make us think, is that really all that attractive? Is that the kind of milk and honey we really want? But remember, they'd been in the wilderness for 2 generations, learning how to survive on much less than that. And remember as well that even Egypt had been called a land of milk and honey, but come on, who got to drink the milk and eat the honey there? Of course, only rich Egyptians. The promised land wasn't a place where our ancestors only had access to milk and honey. The promised land would flow, teem with milk and honey, and it would flow for all, without distinction. That's where they were headed, to a new land with plenty enough for all, a land of freedom from the inescapable crucible. We were there, the iron furnace. We are here on the brink of the promised land, and we're going yonder. We're going yonder. So what's that have to do with the 10 Commandments that I just read for you? Or, as I told you, I was going to call them 10 conditions. Now, why would I call them the 10 conditions? On the one hand, there's a lot of talk in the Bible where God says something like, if you faithfully obey all my commandments, if you do these things, then you shall be blessed in the city and in the field, and your children will be blessed, and so will the ground you tread, and your cattle will have lots of calves, and your sheep will fill the hillsides, and you'll have plenty of bread to eat. You'll be blessed when you leave your house, and you'll be blessed whenever you come back, if you obey all my commandments. That's one kind of condition. It's an if-then proposition. So the Ten Commandments, there are more than just suggestions. They're a deal. They're terms of a deal. And the church has used the commandments as such, as that kind of condition for hundreds of years, as in, listen, you want God's blessing, you want God's grace, then behave. Or to put it another way, God's commands, we have often taught that God's commands are to be used to sort out the good people from the bad people, the righteous from the unrighteous, to sort out God's friends from the riffraff. And we've used the commandments along with all manner of other laws and rules and expectations, some of which are kind of included in the Bible, but a lot of which are just sewn together out of whole cloth. We've used these to make God's love conditional, as if somehow we were in a position to observe people's behavior and decide who is worthy of God's grace. We have been wrong to do that. And we owe a deep, deep apology to any and all who have been victims of our misreading of the commandments. We have tossed people into the iron furnace, and they did not deserve it, and we ought not to have done it. That said, in another way, the Ten Commandments are conditions, but now I'm using the word condition in a very different way. They're conditions for the prospering in a land of milk and honey, not just for some, but for all, in a land flowing with milk and honey. So how do I describe this use of the word conditions? Well, some years ago, I planted a couple of blueberry bushes in front of our house. They haven't really done very much. Oh, I haven't killed them, so there's that. That's a good thing. And this year we even got a blueberry or two. Hardly enough to make a pie out of, not even to get a mouthful. I've done a bit of research on what I probably should be doing to help them thrive. Maybe there's a botanist or two out there who wants to send me a suggestion. I'd be happy to hear it. I'm told that I need to change the conditions, right? The ground may well be low on magnesium, so I should put some Epsom salt mixed in with a little bit of apple cider vinegar. That should help. Maybe I should trim back the Crimson Queen Japanese maple that's right in front of it so they get more sunshine. Or maybe they get too much sunshine. They're on the south side of the house. I probably should put some kind of special fertilizer down, or maybe the right kind of mulch, or whatever. You get the point. If you want a living being to thrive, you have to pay attention to its conditions. So, back to the story. Here we are, just about to be planted in the promised land, and hopefully we're going to keep looking forward and not go back to the iron furnace and not become the very kind of people from whom God had rescued us in the first place. So what kind of conditions will contribute to our flourishing? What will make us a delightful and joyful people in the world? How about these? Let's always honor God as our creator, so we'll treat both God and the creation with respect. Let's be reverent, not just inside our heads, but with the way we speak to one another and the way we speak about God, or the way we speak about anything God has created. We'll set aside a day a week to give our bodies the rest that they need, and whenever we can, we will be generous with others so that they can have the rest and the relaxation that they need as well. We'll acknowledge, while we're living in this promised land, we'll acknowledge somebody needs to make decisions on our behalf, starting with our parents. Let's value life itself, because God gives it dignity and beauty. Let's cherish loving relationships and not treat them casually as if we could just toss them out without consequence. We'll recognize that what belongs to us is ours. What belongs to others is theirs. We'll tell the truth and stay away from gossiping. And let's be satisfied with and be grateful for the gifts we've been given. How's that sound? Sound like a pretty decent way to live? I think so. Well, what would you prefer? What would you prefer? Remember the way the Apostle Paul anticipated things would work out if we turn away from the right growing conditions. Repetitive, loveless, cheap sex, a stinking accumulation of mental and emotional garbage, frenzied and joyless grabs for happiness, trinket gods, magic show religion, paranoid loneliness, cutthroat competition, all-consuming yet never satisfied wants, a brutal temper, impotence to love or be loved, divided homes and divided lives, a small-minded and lopsided pursuits, the vicious habit of depersonalizing everyone into a rival, uncontrolled and uncontrollable addictions. Man, you want that? That's Bedford Falls after Mr. Potter takes over from the movie It's a Wonderful Life. You want that? Those conditions are a recipe for death. That's death. Moses says, just a few chapters down the road, Moses says, as I say to you, choose life. Choose the conditions that will help you flourish. Choose the best way to live. Choose the human way to live. Church, leave the iron furnace of petty judgmentalism behind. People of God, choose milk and honey. Amen. That's the good news for this week, good word for this week, and pray that you'll maybe find a slightly different angle on the Ten Commandments than you've heard before, something that will be helpful to you in your daily life and as you think about the life of the people of God and of the world. That said, that's all for this week. I'll see you next week. Peace be with you as always.